The Star Sport podcast is brought to you by Access Credit Union. Access Credit Union, funding dreams for over 50 years.
Close your eyes and pull like a dog.
And a new Irish record for Phil Healy, 22.99.
Christy Cooney hands over the Sam Maguire Cup to Ger McCarthy, Cork All-Ireland champions for the 7th time ever.
So hello and welcome once again to another episode of the Star Sport podcast. I'm your host Matthew Hurley. I'm joined today by special guest this week, Ger McCarthy. The Star Sport podcast is brought to you in association with our friends at Access Credit Union. Access Credit Union, where your bank really does matter. Choose credit union, choose local, choose community. Now, on this week's show, we will reflect on what has been a tough week for the Cork camogie team with a heartbreaking All-Ireland final defeat to Galway on a scoreline of 114-113. The 3-in-a-row charge is no more. And I suppose your disappointing end of the season for the Cork camogie team, but you have to admit the better team won on the day.
Yeah, Matthew, that's it in a nutshell, really. Not just the senior final, but the All-Ireland under 23 final as well, where Cork had won all their games coming into it. And a Cathal Murray Galway team came up with the tactics to stifle them on a very hot day in Limerick and won that trophy. But yeah, it hasn't been the best of hunting grounds, Croke Park, for Cork Camogie this year, to put it mildly. But I think we got the final we were hoping for in terms of intensity, in terms of physicality, and in terms of skill. Plenty of talking points as well. But I think overall, and especially in the first, for me, 20-25 minutes, Galway dictated the pace. Galway dictated the physicality. They won the key 50-50s, and Cork were playing catch up. I know Mairead Dillon's goal was a kind of an early outlier, but the fact that they had built up such a lead at half time, and also Cork had wasted a penalty opportunity, and then lost Hannah Looney, as good as the second half performance was from Cork, I think apart from the controversy with some of the refereeing decisions and apart from the missed opportunities, you have to say, like you did, that Galway just about deserved it. Not quite sure where all the vitriol came from the Galway camp afterwards about being written off. Certainly weren't written off by us in the Southern Star or in certain sections, most sections of the media. But look, you do what you do to motivate yourself, and this Galway team had some serious match winners who all showed up on the day, and their tactics and their game plan worked. And albeit by a point right at the end, Cork will feel hard done by. But yeah, I think the right result, to be fair, if you're being very fair about it, Galway just about deserved it.
Definitely the right result in many ways, considering the performances of both teams. But considering half-time, Cork were 5 points down, and then Hannah Looney gets sent off at the stroke of half-time. Do you think the Cork team deserve a massive amount of credit for their second half fight back? If initially Orla Callahan's goal levelled it at 113 apiece until obviously Carrie Dolan's winning free. For that alone, do Cork deserve a lot of credit?
100%. 100%. I think Ger McCarthy was the biggest embodiment of that, and the way she played in the second half and knocked over long range frees and drove Cork forward. I also think Ger Manley deserves a bit of credit because he emptied his subs bench early, something maybe he didn't do last year when Cork only beat Galway by 3 points in the previous All-Ireland final. For heart, for work rate, for skill, for effort, you can never ever write this Cork team off. People forget very quickly that for many of the Cork panel out in the pitch that day, this was their 5th consecutive All-Ireland final appearance. People, apparently a lot more than we realise. We're talking about 3 in a row, but to reach 5 finals in a row takes a huge amount of professionalism, high performance, dedication, and Cork have been the most consistent team at senior level over the last 5 years. Galway are the deserving champions, yes, but I think Cork have certainly been the outlier, or sorry, been the benchmark for most counties in that 5-year spell. When you're a player down, as we've seen in other codes and you've seen in written match reports on Matthew, sometimes you actually play above yourself and you forget about the score and you forget about the uphill struggle and you just go for it because you've nothing left to lose. And I think that's really what Cork did. But I do praise Ger McCarthy in particular for the second half performance. The half back line, Laura Tracy, Laura Walsh were outstanding driving forward in that period. But also Ger Manley, he brought on the subs, he brought on the legs, the young legs, the fresh legs that gave Cork impetus, and a magnificent goal from Orla Callahan. Might have been, at the end, maybe a draw was in the offing until Carrie Dolan landed that superb free from way out in the left. But no, you can never discount this team for quality, for physicality as well. A lot of people talking about Galway's physicality. Cork have plenty of physicality and talent, and very few teams would have been able to put in that second half performance down. Not alone down a player, Matthew, but down such an influential player in Hannah Looney around the middle of the park. I was really, really impressed. It probably made it all the more gut wrenching for Ger Manley and the Cork players, but they did everything they possibly could in the second half and do deserve credit for that performance.
And when you look at the other side of the coin, obviously Galway's performance, you have to give credit to them. Obviously, they were absolutely superb in the first half with 1-9 scored. Overall across the entire game, 1-12 came off their turnovers as well. It was clear what Galway's kind of plan was for Cork's puckouts. Cork only lost 2 puckouts, but once Amy Lee poked the ball short, Galway were on them for the second and third ball. And it happened nearly all day, and you have to give Galway a lot of credit. Over 40 turnovers in just over 60 minutes of camogie as well. They deserve a lot in terms of their performance in the All-Ireland final. We have to give them that.
Absolutely, yeah. And like as we said, it was the right result because they were the better team, certainly in the first half. And they hung in there in the second half as well. You could have, when things weren't going their way and Cork chipped away at the lead and Callan got the goal, it was looking like we were in for a sensational comeback victory. But I think the hurt of losing last year's final, the hurt of, the last couple of years and missing out on All Irelands they feel they should have won, and having that experience spine to the team certainly was the big thing for me, Matthew. You talk about the Cork players who impressed. Ciara Hickey was the sweeper at the back and did a very understated role, but swept up a lot of ball. The full back line, anchored by that full back, Roisin Black. I thought Rachel Hannafy did very well as well. Like, it's very rare for the entire Cork full forward line to be subbed. Now, I know Amy O'Connor and Katrina Mackey were carrying knocks, and Saoirse McCartan just wasn't able to influence the game she normally does, but that's testament to the way that Galway defended. I think I described it in this week's Southern Star as frenzied pressure or frenzied intensity, and that's what it was. And one of the key things for me, you talk about pushing up on the Cork puckouts when they were coming out with the ball. One of the big key factors for me in the first half, certainly as well, was the way every time Saoirse McCarthy or Aisling Thompson came within, 10 feet of the ball, there was 3 Galway players around them. They obviously identified a couple of Cork players as well as the half back line of Laura Walsh, Laura Tracy and Aoife Healy, and stopping them at source. Stopping Cork at source meant Cork couldn't get the ball and couldn't get into their rhythm. And Galway physically knocked them out of it in those opening 20 minutes. And just the way they lined up, I think they'd be talking about Aisling O'Reilly or Ailish O'Reilly, who came out from her full forward position and played around the middle of the park, and Alwyn Rabbit as well. I think a lot of dog work and work rate and just closing Cork down, and the physicality that they showed. Cork just had not experienced that all year. Covered most of their matches, and they've had tight games, but they've won them all by 10, 12, even more, 20 points. Cork just hadn't the experience of that full 60 minutes of physicality, of work rate, something that they themselves pride themselves on. And you got to give them credit. Like, I mean, Carrie Dolan, and I'm just looking down through my notes here, Aoife Donoghue as well. Like, she was lucky enough now that she was still on the field, in my opinion, but put herself about, as did all the Galway players. And when you allow Cork to do the short puckouts, and when you allow, as your statistics showed, to come a certain way up the field, if you're good at turnovers and if you're winning turnovers, the momentum, the shift in intensity for your team when you grab the ball off Cork, you could see it every time they did it. They were roaring, they were punching the air, they were getting in Cork's faces. They just built that momentum. They built a very, very impressive first half lead before a player was ever sent off. And I think that was probably the bedrock and just enough to get them over the line in the second half when Cork did come back at them. But certainly, yeah, you got to give Cathal Murray credit here and his backroom team. Tactics spot on, and they knew how to kill the Cork rhythm at source, and it was enough to get them the 1 point win.
And you mentioned Aoife Donoghue there, her performance, and you mentioned as well her foul for the penalty, and you mentioned the red card as well. It is the elephant in the room, Joe. We have to mention it. A lot of talk online, as you mentioned at the start of the chat, about the refereeing in the game. Justin Heffernan was the referee. A few key decisions to look at. Number one, obviously, the Hannah Looney red card. Number two, Aoife Donoghue fouling Amy O'Connor. Could it have been a red? She was given a yellow in the end. And when Amy Lee got pushed by Caoimhe Kelly quite clearly, but in many people's eyes, and then Caoimhe Kelly put it over the bar, and in the end, there was a point between the teams. So a bit of controversy there. What was your overall thoughts of Justin Heffernan's performance?
Well, firstly, my first answer to this, and I knew it'd be asked, and I've kind of written about it as well. He's not the reason Cork lost. I would come out straight and fair. We can't be picking on referees. It's hard enough to get referees at club level, inter-county level. Justin Heffernan is not the reason Cork lost. Galway won that All-Ireland final because they were hungrier, sharper, and won the greater amount of dirty ball. Now, have Cork a right to feel aggrieved at some of the things that you've listed there? Yes, absolutely. I felt the push on Amy Lee was a foul, and it should have been a free out. And Galway got a point from it. But those things happen in every match. Anna Looney's red card, was it a red card? It was, because she raised her hand and hit Anne-Marie Starr. But why didn't he take into account the fact that the reason she did that is that she was elbowed clearly into the back and he was looking straight at it and there was no consequences for that. Hannah Looney, and also cliche, isn't that type of player. She does play on the edge, as a lot of the Galway players do. But for her to turn around and do that, she shouldn't have done it, and she knows she shouldn't have done it. But the reason she did it, Matthew, is because she got hit in the back when she wasn't expecting it, and that went on. That wasn't penalised. The penalty for Amy O'Connor and the robust challenge that if you don't know who put in, I've seen those given as red cards. I have seen those given as red cards. No, it was the first half, it was early, so the chances are it wasn't going to happen anyway. But there was a couple of occasions when Galway players definitely were playing on the edge, which they had to do if they were going to beat Cork. Let's be honest about it. You stand back and let Cork play, they'll beat you. But you got to get in their faces. You got to play it right on the edge. And take a few yellows and possibly even a red in this situation. But I mean, Ger Manley in his immediate aftermatch comments was scathing. I went very, very upset, not scathing, very upset with the referee. And look, if you've just lost an All-Ireland final and you've been with this group of players all year, you're going to naturally feel upset, and the blood is still pumping. So I know Ger very well. You know him as well. Like, he's quite restrained in his comments always. He's always very fair as much as he can be. But he was clearly upset with those decisions that you talked about. But you've got to take another step back, Matthew. If those were right and wrong decisions, Galway will point to a couple of decisions that went against them at key moments as well down the stretch, where Cork players took the ball or where Galway players took the ball into contact, but it was Cork who got the freeze. So I'm not saying it. Some people I've seen in podcasts and on the radio saying the decisions even themselves out over the 60 minutes. They did not, in my opinion. The three or four key decisions went against Cork, but there have been other finals which Cork have won in which those decisions went their way. So over a period of 5 years, I would say those decisions tend to even themselves out. I understand the frustration with the referee when you're the losing side, but I go back to my original point. He's not the reason Cork lost. That first 20, 25 minutes was what decided this year's All-Ireland final. I know it came close down the stretch and Cork fought back, but long before Cork had a player sent off, Galway were dictating the pace. Galway were dictating the game. Galway were dictating the tempo, and Galway were winning all the 50-50 balls. And the kind of players that you look to in that situation on the Cork side of things are Ger McCarthy, who was gobbled up by three players every time she moved. Ashley Thompson got a very harsh yellow, but early on, and I think that did curb a little bit of what she would normally be like in the second half, and that she had to limit herself for fear of getting sent off. So there were things that went against Cork in terms of referees' decisions, yes, but there were other decisions that went against Galway. There was also a question mark over the winning free that Kate Wall went over and knocked over one of the Galway players. I would agree that the Galway player made the most of it, but at the same time, those frees are always given. If a player has been slightly pushed in the back and she goes flat on her hands out, it's going to be given as a free. And let's talk about carry. Like, the way to win an All-Ireland final is to nail a 55-meter free right on the sideline. That's quality, that's class, and that's what we should be talking about. But to just put a line under it, the refereeing, some of the most of the major decisions in that final went against Cork. I would agree with the Ger Manley's assessment, but I would not agree with the online vitriol and nastiness being shoved at the referee that he was the reason that Cork lost. He most certainly was not. And I think when people have had time to have a reflect on it, watch it, and it's easy for me to say from this position, but for the players and the management, it'll be over the winter that they probably go back, if they decide to go back and look at it at all, over the 60 minutes, as you've said, and we've both seen. I just thought Galway were slightly the better team on the day. And in fairness, Ger Manley did say that as well, but that's been lost in all the headlines. He was magnanimous in it. What I didn't like after all of that, and still don't like, are the Cathal Murray comments and some of the comments of the Galway players saying that they'd been written off and disrespected by some people in the Cork media. Now, if that's aimed at us, I don't think it is. But even if it is, if it's aimed at the Examiner, or the Echo, or the Southern Star, or all the papers or the radio stations, way out of line. That is not the case. It was when we did the press media night at Castle Road, every single one of the players I interviewed made a point of saying it's not about the three in a row. They all said it. It's not about the three in a row. Ger Manley said it. It's an All-Ireland final all on its own. But if that's what Galway needed to get their ire up and their back up, well, fair enough. But I think it did leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth with the aftermatch comments, I'll be honest about it. I'm surprised at Colin Murray. He's a guy holding the highest esteem and some of the players. But look, they won the All-Ireland final. They beat a team looking to win a third consecutive All-Ireland. They beat a team in their fifth final. They beat the most consistent team at senior level in that time period, and they deserve huge credit for the manner in which they did it. It's just sad that a lot of the big decisions that went against Cork seem to be taking over the headlines coming out of it, because what we should be talking about is the two best teams, the two best managers putting up an absolutely brilliant All-Ireland camogie final. And I have a feeling we'll see these two teams again next year in the semi-final, if not the final, because that's how highly I rate both of them.
We probably will. And I suppose, like you mentioned, three in a row briefly there. The only team actually in the All-Ireland Camogie Championship to achieve the three in a row since 1975 was Wexford between 2010 and 2012. Were we underestimating how hard it is to actually achieve the three in a row?
Yes, I think we were, and I think sometimes when you're coming in, when you have a 2 week lead in, and this isn't clutching at straws, but you and I have both been through the build up to the football final, even though it didn't involve Cork, the hurling final, and the ladies football towards that as well with Dublin Meath. There's not a lot of time between those. It's usually only about a week the way the calendar falls, but for the camogie, it's 2 weeks. So there was a bit of breathing room. So there was a lot more ground to cover, a lot more storylines to investigate. And I think a lot of people did latch on to the three in a row and the history of the three in a row without, as you correctly said, saying this is a huge achievement for any team to do it. Now, with respect, in the modern era of camogie, I would say there's 4 or 5 counties every year who are the likeliest that are going to win the All Ireland. That's Cork, Galway, Tip, Kilkenny, and Waterford. I'd add to that list now as well. That's not being disrespectful to the rest of the country. It's just the way it is. This is where camogie is strongest. Ladies football is a bit more spread out. Football, it's wide open, and hurling is the same 3 or 4 again. But when you have a 2 week lead in, you have a lot more time to talk about and focus on these things. And I think it was overplayed, to be quite honest with you. Because if it had never, let's just imagine it wasn't the three in a row that Cork were chasing, I think that the headlines coming out of this All Ireland final would be a lot different, and they'd be angled a lot more to what a fantastic spectacle it was and what a great physical game. A lot of debate at the moment, Matthew, as you know, in ladies football about what is a tackle and what isn't a tackle. A lot of debate in camogie about letting things go. I've sat through enough All Ireland finals where there was a whistle every 2 minutes and there was no flow to it. Heffernan, the referee last day, did his best to let it flow. It meant that he got things wrong. It meant that there was overzealous tackling. But the physicality that we want in camogie and ladies football was there for all to see. There was a couple of flare-ups and the players squaring up, which I love to see as well. Why shouldn't the women do it? The men do it, but why shouldn't the women do it? They're just as dedicated. They're just as passionate. They want to win an All Ireland just as much as a man does in a similar All Ireland final. So I think we're certainly heading in the right direction in terms of letting it go. But three in a row, and as you pointed out there from Wexford, and as you also pointed out, when Wexford last did that, they haven't won All Ireland since 2013. So sometimes when you have a generational team, it's possible to do it. But I think in the modern era, there's so little between Cork, Galway, Kilkenny, and Tip and Waterford most years. There's not a lot in it that it's even harder to do when there's that small sample size of potential winners to come from. Um, I certainly don't think this is the end of this Cork team in terms of winning an All Ireland, but in terms of winning it three in a row, I think it's going to become much harder for the reasons they've just outlined there. That there's like a 4 or 5 group of teams that could beat anybody on their day, and we've seen that over the last 2 All Ireland finals. Cork won by 3 points last year against Galway. Galway won by 1. So there's nothing between these teams. Absolutely nothing.
You mentioned the one final thing I'm going to go on to, obviously, is the All Ireland for next year. Cork won the league title by 11 points. Up until the final, they averaged a winning margin of 20 points before the final against Galway. And obviously, Galway were just a better team in the final. Cork didn't do a lot wrong this year. So does that indicate that they'll be well up there for 2026?
Absolutely, absolutely, they can. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, like the sample size of potential winners at senior level is small. It's Cork, it's Galway, it's Tip, it's Kilkenny, it's Waterford. Um, you mentioned there that the winning margins as well that Cork have had during the year. I wouldn't say they had it easy, but that very few teams play with the physicality of a Galway or of a Kilkenny or of a Cork, so they don't tend to meet that challenge as much. Certainly in the National League, when a lot of teams are experimenting, as Galway are in the National League final when they lost out, it just shows you that when come championship time and they run into an All Ireland, teams get their runs, they time it just right. And also, I think one of the key things this year, different from last year, was the fact that both semi-finals were quite competitive. Waterford put it up to Cork, and Tipperary definitely put it up to Galway in the semi-final, and both teams were better for coming into it. When you look at the Cork team for 2026, obviously the club championships are around the corner, so they won't really have time to dwell on what's just happened for too long. They'll be straight into that. But over the winter months, I'm expecting Ger Manley to come back. I haven't any inside knowledge as to whether that's the case or not just yet. But I think knowing Ger, he won't want to leave after what happened this year, losing out by a point. He certainly want another crack off it. And why wouldn't he? Look at the depth of the panel matching in the Cork team. There's a lot of younger players now starting to make their mark over the last 12, 24 months. And I certainly think the under-23s will feed into that again next year. But when you look at Cork, the experienced players down the middle, the Amy O'Connors, the Katrina Mackey, the two Mackeys, Laura Tracy, Aisling Thompson, Hannah Looney, they've been on the road quite a long time. But I think such is their influence and such is the manner in which they look after themselves. I'd be surprised if anybody stepped away from the Cork senior panel, irrespective of the miles that are up on the clock or that the age profile, because they showed in that Ireland final, even with 14 players, that they're still capable of mixing it with the best, if not being the best and most consistent team. So yeah, I would imagine the majority of the squad, I would imagine, will return. I would imagine Ger Manley will return, and most of his management team, maybe one or two changes, I don't know. But those kind of decisions won't come for a while yet because the club championships are upon us. But I do think even if Cork did lose one or two stalwarts to retirement or from injury or whatever reason, there now are a group of players ready to come in and nail down a first team place, like Murphy, Millie Condon, and a lot of the players in the under-23 team showed up this year that they could eventually make the step up. So the key is to transition in those players without dropping standards. But I think there's enough talent. I think there's enough depth to the current Cork senior panel to put them straight in as one of the favourites for next year. Now, who knows what happens next year? But certainly right now, if you're asking me, yeah, they're themselves in Galway. I wouldn't rule out. I don't know what way the semi-final draw will work, but if we had a trilogy of finals between these two teams, I don't think anybody would complain after what they served up the last day in terms of drama, in terms of physicality, fronting up to one another. There's no love lost there. There's a real edge to the rivalry, but that's same as the men. That's what we want to see. That's what we like to see, and I think that's the thing that will drive it more than anything. I think most of the Cork panel will not want to leave on the note that they've left it on this year. So yeah, challengers, if not one of the favourites again for next year. But we'll see what happens over the winter.
Here's hoping they can regain the O'Duffy Cup for 2026. Thanks for your time, Ger.
No bother. Thanks, mate.
The Star Sport podcast is brought to you by Access Credit Union. Access Credit Union, funding dreams for over 50 years.
This week's Southern Star Sports section is packed full of content as usual. Obviously, there will be all the reaction from the All-Ireland camogie final defeat to Galway for the Cork camogie team. There's going to be 3 pages of action between 2 and 4 this week, full of analysis, reaction, and of course, a match report from the final itself. John Hayes' column this week is about John Cleary signing on a new 2-year term with the Cork footballers and the opportunity that arises for the Cork team next year needing to improve. Back home, there was the Carberry Under-21 Championship semi-finals, and we will have reports and reaction from all 4 games across grades A, B and C, the main ones being the A grade, where Ibane Gales and Bantry Blues progressed to the A final. We also look ahead to the Cork LGFA and Camogie Club Championships this week, with Carberry in action in Camogie this weekend, and we spoke to Teddy O'Regan, their manager and chairman, before this weekend's game against Shandoon. There will be an interview with Niall O'Sullivan, the Newstown Hurley manager, before their crunch tie against Middleton in the Cork Premier Senior Hurling Championship. There was also success in the athletics field for Dara McElhenney and Caoimhe Flannery, and we will cover them in this week's paper. The usual content in terms of motorsport and road bowling will also be available this week. So in shops on Thursday, the Southern Star Sports section for this week. And as usual, if you are further afield or can't make it to the shops, you could subscribe to the Southern Star e-paper and get the Southern Star on your laptop, tablet or phone. Just go to www.southernstar.ie/subscribe, enter your details, and you'll get an exact replica of the newspaper for less than €2 per week. As always, thanks for listening to the Star Sport podcast, and thanks again to our sponsors at Access Credit Union. If you've enjoyed this, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back with another show next week. Until then, take care.